It's the Happy Families podcast. It's the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now.
You are the most capable person to see and understand your children and what they need in terms of their education. Parents would be surprised once you get a good rhythm how well it comes together with your kids.
And now here's the stars of our show, my mum and dad.
Hello, this is Dr. Justin Coulson, the podcast host of the Dr. Justin Coulson's Happy Families podcast, the number one podcast for parents and family in Australia, according to the Australian podcast ranker. I like
That's a lot of podcasts.
I like it when the news comes out like that. And can I just make a comment? I don't know if you can hear it in the background, but with our new living arrangement, we're in an Airbnb rather than our usual office studio, and we're moving into a tiny little house. We're getting used to. So we used to live on 4,500 square metres of land, and our neighbours were a long way away from us, and we had all this space. And now we've moved into suburbia on the coast, and we have to put up with dogs barking and cars going past, and life has changed. It's just not the same anymore, Kylie. And now the dog's gone quiet.
But we've got the beach.
Yeah, that's true. And it's worth it. So if you hear any funny noises in the background of our number one podcast in Australia for parenting and family, can I say that one more time? That would be why. Wouldn't it be terrible if we stopped being the number one podcast because all of a sudden people could hear the neighbours or the dogs or the cars?
Real life, honey, real life.
We have an important conversation to have today, and we're going to break it into two parts, as we always do. First part of the conversation is you and I having a discussion about a listener question, but then we're actually going to bring in somebody with lived experience. I was going to say an expert. Does lived experience qualify you as an expert? I'm not sure. But we're going to bring somebody in who knows more than we do about it. So here's the question. It comes from Bree, who says, hi, Justin and Kylie. I am a mum of 3 kids. They're 4, 2 and 6 months old. So young family. I love it when they're that age. So much fun, so much energy, so much exhaustion. With my eldest due to start school next year, Bree says, I'm currently discerning the educational direction of our family, and I'm very seriously considering homeschooling. I'm a primary school teacher myself. So it's a mammoth shift in mindset for me to opt out of the mainstream school setting and home educate our kids. We have our reasons for considering this direction to ensure the flourishing of our children. However, there are some very strong opinions out there about homeschooling and stigmas attached to it. I would greatly appreciate an open, honest discussion of the pros, cons, benefits and deficits of homeschooling versus mainstream schooling. So, Kylie, the first thing I'm going to highlight is that we're going to put this on our Facebook page, and Bree and anyone else who is really interested in this homeschooling conversation, if you've ever thought about it, we're going to open it up and get people to talk about the pros, the cons, the benefits, the deficits, and the stigma associated with homeschooling. We'll make sure that that appears on our Facebook page today, so you can join the conversation there. But we've been through this conversation ourselves, Kylie, haven't we? Like, how many times do you think?
I think with each child, with each addition to our family, it has definitely come up in conversation. And as our children have had different challenges within the school system, we've thought about what it would mean to actually bring them home and you know, kind of support their learning from home.
And I've been the one who's pushed it, and you've been the one who's pushed against it. Like, there's been a couple of times where we've almost pulled the trigger on it. There's been a couple of times where we've sat down with friends who have homeschooled their kids and we've said, we can't stand it anymore, we don't like the school environment, or the kids are having this problem or that problem, and it would be so much better if we could just have the freedom that homeschool would allow. And they've looked at us funnily and said, freedom is one word you could use, but it might not be the best word. So let's just talk about the issues with the school system generally as a starting point. When I think about schools, and I want to do this with great respect and tenderness and compassion and gentleness for the school teachers who are working in a system that is sometimes so challenging for them and for the kids. But what I see generally, and this is partly on the parents and it's partly on the curriculum, there's so many different ways that we can look at this. School is so hyper competitive for so many. There's such enormous expectation. The workload is massive. You always learn at the rate of the slowest child. There are different ways that schools can, or teachers can get around this, but there's a curriculum, there's stuff that has to be covered off, there are all these expectations, but there's also the cultural stuff, the values things. I speak to so many parents who say, oh, it's just the values clash. Our kids are being exposed to some other kids who see the world very, very differently. There's bullying. There's the desire to keep kids innocent. And I think there's also that reality that sometimes school just feels like there is no joy for some children in school.
I think that's a really good point, and it's the one thing that stands out to me when I talk to parents who are homeschooling. There's a return to the inquisitive nature of children to want to learn.
And let's talk about why we haven't done it. I mean, with all of those things that we might say, yeah, this is not ideal, this is not what we want for our kids when it comes to school. All of our kids have had a traditional schooling experience. None of them have been homeschooled or anything even close to it. And the reasons that we've kept our kids in school, in spite of all the conversations we've had, Kylie, have been?
Number one, hands down for me, was just a feeling of inadequacy.
Right.
I'm a parent. I'm not a teacher.
Yeah.
And I felt so ill-equipped to deal with them as the children obviously got older. That would have been my number one reason for not doing it.
Yeah, lack of knowledge. And the second one?
The second one, I think, would just be the fact that there are already so many moving parts in our life, and homeschooling is a complete shift in lifestyle, and I just couldn't see how we could do it and do it effectively. I don't feel like I have the capacity to be my children's all.
Right.
And I know with homeschooling
You're part of a homeschool community.
And there are other people that come in. But for all intents and purposes, I'm with my children 24/7 and I don't want to have to be their teacher and their mum.
Yeah.
I want to be able to be their mum, and I feel like when I have my time, I'm able to be a better mum. I show up as a better person as a result. And so, yeah, I couldn't physically work out how to compartmentalize things and be able to make that massive shift of being everything.
For me, when we had the conversations, the main reason that I stopped pushing, even though I keep bringing it up and I've said so many times, let's just do it, is I knew that ultimately it would fall to you. I'm running 2 businesses. There are so many moving parts in my life. I can't be there for you while you're homeschooling the kids and also expect you to run the family and do everything else that has to be done. And as we've looked at it from that lifestyle point of view, as much as there's lots of opportunity and some great experiences, we've decided that for our family, it would simply be too much. It would be beyond our capacity to actually make it happen.
I think in Bree's situation, she's at a beautiful stage of family life where she actually can move into this very gently. She's got a 5-year-old starting school. And I know when we did schooling from home when COVID began, working with my 5-year-old at home was a delight. I absolutely loved doing that with her, and I would have kept doing that with her. But as the children continue to grow and their maths and science get a little bit more complicated than making volcanoes in the sand, that kind of is very intimidating.
That's a really interesting point. Had we started early with number one, or just with 2 kids in the early days, probably would have been a much more achievable task. But the last time we had the conversation was only a couple of years ago, maybe 3 years ago.
We've got high schoolers.
How are we going to do this with 4 or 5 or 6 kids across the entire educational spectrum? And that was the other reason that we pulled well, maybe we'll just do it with the baby. Well, how come she gets the special treatment? So in the end, we've opted out. But right after the break, we're going to have a conversation with a mum who has taken the plunge and find out what her real life experience has been. Dads are pretty awesome. Just ask me. Today, more dads are more involved with their children's lives than ever before, and research shows that their children are really benefiting from it. But too often, dads don't realise just how vital they really are. In the Dadding Done Right webinar, join me as I examine how dads can be a fantastic support, the ideal role model, and an excellent all-round best dad ever. Check out Dadding Done Right at the Happy Families webshop.
It's the Happy Families podcast, the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now. And Bree wants the pros and cons to homeschooling.
So we've given it our best shot. We don't really know what we're talking about, though, so we decided to call in an expert, a friend of ours from the Illawarra area, Jody, mum to 5 kids. It is so great to have you with us.
Thank you for having me on.
I just wanted to give you the round of applause, the roaring approval, because we know that you're going to help Bree to make the most important decision about her children's education that she's ever made.
No pressure, Jodie.
Yeah, it is a big decision. It's definitely something that we didn't jump into overnight. We had a big think about it for probably almost 2 years.
Oh, that is a big thing.
For us, it was a huge decision because our children's education is probably one of the most important things to us. And obviously, if we get it wrong, that's going to have a huge impact on their future and their capacity as, even their adulthood and what their potential income or future might look like down the track.
Yeah,
so for us, it was
scarred for life if you get this wrong, Jodie. Scarred for life. No, I'm just kidding. Bree, if you're listening, I'm just kidding. It's important, but it's not that important. All right.
So we're curious, Jodie, what was the actual catalyst? What made you decide that homeschooling was what you wanted to do for your family?
2 years of thinking.
Yeah, I think, when I started schooling my children about 10, nearly going into 11 years now, it was something that was floating around in the back of my head, but I kind of thought, look, I don't really know anything about it. I have no idea if I have the capacity to do it. And we had 3 businesses and 3 kids under 3, which sort of made it not really a doable thing for us at that point in our lives.
Sorry, just pause. Just pause. I just want everyone to hear what you said. 3 kids under 3 and 3 businesses. And
yes,
I know.
We didn't get bored.
Those businesses that you and your husband have run have been successful businesses. It's not like you were saying that you're running a business because you've just made up something. Like you were this was legit. So, beyond your capacity.
Oh, yeah. Look, I think at that point it would have been all but impossible for us to jump into that unless we made some big changes in the way that I participated in the businesses. And look, over the 10 years that we've had the girls in school, that was something that we decided was necessary. Me being home a bit more than I was, especially with the travel to Sydney from the Illawarra and things like that. So it was important for me to be present for the girls. And as I started to press into that a little bit more, I guess that was probably one of the major decisions. When we had the whole lockdown period, it was very obvious to me that the girls really thrived when we spent more time together. So, and also more time together as a family, like with their siblings. They got on even better than I could have imagined, actually, even in a really stressful and hard situation with all the lockdowns and all the things that went with that. So for me, it was just a observation that they thrived in an environment where they worked together, learnt from each other, and spent more time together. So I think that was probably the number one thing that sort of tipped it to me.
That's awesome. I'm wondering, Jodie, obviously you've suggested that you've thought about this for some time. What were you worried about? You touched on a little bit the fact that you weren't sure about your capacity, but were there other things that you were worried about?
There absolutely was. I have sort of been waiting for my youngest to go into kindergarten so that I can get back into the business in a full-time capacity. And that's actually this year for us.
So that's off the table.
So I was... And I was like, look, I don't think that I can do full-time work and full-time
the things some people will do to get out of work. That's all I'm saying. Because looking after 5 kids at home and homeschooling is not work at all.
Yeah. So something that was really interesting to me is that the lockdown schooling was very, very different from what homeschool looks like for us this year. I wouldn't claim that I'm an expert in any regard. We're very much newbies, only having started at the beginning of this year formally after our registration. But it's a very different thing to school being administered at home by a department or by a teacher. And
can you tell us a bit about that, Jodie?
I found that very stressful.
Yeah. So
we actually had
an
extra. Yeah, we had an extra as well, which was my nephew in kindergarten living with us at the time. So we had 6 children at home on devices, and they all had Zoom calls at certain times. And I was like tech support for 6 children, trying to do something different and new and quite difficult. And it wasn't that enjoyable, if I'm completely honest with you. There were definitely parts of it that I enjoyed, but that whole approach to their education was not my idea of the best for them.
So what have you
noticed?
noted?
Other parents found home like school at home difficult, but I certainly found that there was a lot of challenge to that.
That was definitely a theme that we heard time and time again throughout the lockdowns and pandemic in general.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, Jodie, what have been the pros? You've obviously you've done your first term now, and the kids have been at home. They're all learning with you in your home space. What have been the positives that you have seen come out of this?
one of the main things was I noticed when I could actually organise the girls' curriculum so that they were working on the same subject areas at the same time wherever possible, it all started to come together and start working for us as a family. So because a few of our children are quite close in age, their subject matter was quite similar. So I could maybe start one with junior school and one with middle school, and they could both be doing similar things at the same time, and we could do it together. Instead of 6 different kids doing 6 different programming all at the same time, which was just insane. So when I started doing that and they started really responding to me, personalising it for them, and having the flexibility to work with each individual personality, it really started to work. And that was probably the biggest thing that was like, oh, okay, we could actually do this. There was a good 2 hours in our day of travel and just sort of multiple drop-off pickup times. So we sort of saved that time. So it's definitely a lot more flexibility to be able to extend their curriculum and their after-school activities that maybe we could get to, you know, 1 per child through the week before. Now we can do several per child. So they're really interacting with other kids in different areas and sort of pursuing things, their interest areas, with a lot more time and financial capacity too, because they were in private school.
Oh, so you're richer now.
It's been wonderful.
You can afford takeout.
Richer because I get to spend time with them.
Oh, so good. Hey, how much time does it take per day to homeschool 5 kids, 6 kids?
Look, I think that was one of the main things. I thought to myself, I can't do 6 hours times 5 children in one day. That's not even humanly possible. But for me, it's not quite like that, because I've really expanded what it means to homeschool. So when our children do horse riding for 2 hours, that's actually part of their curriculum. We actually have curriculum based around that. That's a lot of different parts of their subject areas get covered in activities that we wouldn't typically call school. So, you know, for example, if they're doing drama classes, if they're doing art classes, if they're doing crochet online with classes, or if they're doing science experiments that they participate in online with groups or classes or co-ops that are available, that's all part of their schooling. But for them, it's fun and they're really thriving.
I mean, there's a lot of people who say, oh, but the kids aren't going to learn as well at home as they do at school. I know you're only just getting started on this, but what have you seen in terms, and the evidence is mixed on this. There's no really great evidence. It seems, from what I've read, and I have looked into this a couple of times, it seems that the research evidence suggests that kids that are homeschooled tend to do just as well as kids that go to school on average, but it really depends on the homeschooling that happens, and it really depends on the quality of the schooling that they experience if they're in traditional schooling. So what have you found? Are the kids learning? Are they keeping up with their peers, if you can even consider that that's relevant?
I think one thing that I noticed right from the get-go was there were holes in their education that I was aware of, because I was sitting with them and going through certain areas, you know. So maybe one kid was struggling with algebra, but another kid was having trouble with this certain times table or whatever it might be. But we could really press into those areas and give that more time than they might have gotten in a classroom situation where they're moving on with the class. So I think for me, that made me feel more confident as we went along, that I was like, oh, good, they've gotten this concept that otherwise they would have missed out on. So I guess everybody would have a different approach with their homeschooling, but we like to sort of have a meeting at the beginning of the week, outline which subject areas we're going to work on which days, and then the older kids just pursue their own learning in their own. They're very diligent and they really just sort of get it done earlier in the mornings, and sometimes we'll all be done by lunchtime, and often we'll have activities that we work around, and so they have to have their learning done by, say, 1 o'clock, because that's when we'll be leaving for whatever it is that we're off to do. And they're quite diligent to just get through the work that's been set out for them. So I guess that's a great plus. We do have some that are less enthusiastic to do it without encouragement, I'll be honest. But it's been a really interesting, and it's been a fabulous journey, actually. I really have found it a lot easier than I thought I would.
That's amazing, Jodie. There's so many questions I've got, and I know that people would love to hear more of your story. Maybe we'll be able to have you back as you go on throughout the journey a little bit further.
Yeah, let us know when it's all falling apart, and we'll do that podcast episode as well.
But I'm wondering, before we finish up, I'm wondering if you could just share maybe 1 or 2 bits of advice that you would give for anyone, including Bree, who is thinking about jumping in and homeschooling their children.
Sure. I think one of the things someone said to me that really hit home was, you are the most capable person to see and understand your children and what they need in terms of their education. So I guess when you drop your kids off at school, you may or may not know what happens in their school day. Often for my children, they were quite tired by the time they got home, and I'd say, how was school? I hadn't seen them for 6-7 hours. They'd say, good. So I guess in that regard, now it's very different. I get to see what they're struggling with. I get to see what they're succeeding in. I get to encourage them in ways that they need it. And for me, being in relationship with my kids is very important, and knowing that they're thriving is very important. And I am fully aware of whatever areas they need help with, and I can be present for that. So that's really encouraging to me, that I can have a really hands-on approach to their education. And I can also, look, in this day and age, there is so much available online, offline. Everything that they could ever want to learn about, we can learn about. It's incredible. So especially for Bree being a school teacher, she obviously has the capacity to teach and is doing that already. And who better to teach than your own children? I mean, obviously it's very different in a home environment, but yeah, I think that parents would be surprised once you get a good rhythm, and that does take a little bit of time, how well it comes together with your kids.
What a great conversation. Jody, a mum of 5 from the Illawarra, who has just taken up homeschooling with her kids at the start of this year after seeing how much the kids seem to thrive being at home during COVID lockdown. So thanks for joining us, Jody.
You're most welcome. Thanks for having a chat.
Kylie, I think that the solution for us is that we need to do it as well. I know everything we talked about in the first half of the podcast. I get it, but doesn't it sound great?
It does. She definitely makes it sound like it would be achievable.
So here's what I think needs to happen. You and Jody have another couple of hours on the phone. We'll wrap up the podcast now. You can talk more about it, and then we'll fill in the paperwork. The Happy Families podcast is produced by Justin Rulon from Bridge Media. Craig Bruce is our executive producer, and we appreciate so much the work that they do. If you would like to know more about how you can raise your kids happy without using carrots and sticks to discipline them, this coming Monday night, the 16th of May, we're going to be talking about carrots and sticks in a Happy Families special webinar. Please join us for that. And tomorrow on the podcast, Kira Pendergast from Safe on Social, talking about the new issue that so many of our tweens and teens are dealing with, cyber flashing and airdrop, plus Instagram sextortion. That's all coming up on the Happy Families podcast.